Great. Well, hi, everybody. I've been able to join a little bit this morning, and I joined a bit yesterday, so I got a bit of a feeling of what's happened. Just to say that while I have good knowledge of the monitoring and evaluation in South Africa, actually I ran the national evaluation system. So my particular expertise is on the evaluation side, although I've done lots of work on planning, etc. as well. And just to, my opening slide, you can see the issues in South Africa of inequality. And so we have both great skills, capacity, capital, and tremendous poverty and huge problems of inequality. So what I'm going to try and talk about is I'm going to sort of cover three sort of main areas. One is to talk about using monitoring and evaluation evidence in the policy cycle and why monitoring and evaluation can be a very important tool. It can also be part of the problem and a compliance exercise. And then I'll talk about some lessons from South Africa around using monitoring and evaluation evidence. And if we get time, we'll do a little bit of an exercise. We'll see how time goes. And otherwise, I'll leave a bit of time for questions and answers. So, I mean, in terms of the way we in South Africa were thinking about monitoring and evaluation, our focus was, on the one hand, improving policy or program performance. The second is improved accountability. The third is around improving decision making. And the fourth is around generating knowledge. And I think all too often it's the accountability that gets the dominant attention. We put a major emphasis on trying to make sure it be used for continuous improvement. But just one thing to bear in mind, I think, is that one of the things that's coming through now as we face the climate catastrophe and the tremendous challenges of pervasive inequality is we need to think more broadly about the systems within which we're operating and not get too, Sanjeev mentioned it in terms of not getting too stuck down a project and program focus and missing the big picture. So, of course, when I talk about this M&E and the policy or program cycle, we're talking about all these different levels, and these words are used sort of interchangeably: plans, policies, strategies, programs, projects, services. And I'm applying it to all of these levels. And what I want to start with is this, what we call the policy or program cycle. And this is something we've used in the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, where I was the Deputy Permanent Secretary, but also in training with many countries. And this basically, it starts with the agenda at the left, which could be a political manifesto or an agenda of a minister or even of a head of department or something. And then ideally what we do is say, well, what's the problem that we're trying to look at? This is classic PDIA stuff. What would be how would we understand the root causes? What might be some of the options? And if it was PDIA, you might go into a quick cycle then of piloting and reflection. But equally, if it's a more major intervention, you then, based on those options, would select the intervention you want. Ideally, you would then develop a theory of change, do your detailed design, do an operational plan, then implement. And then hopefully you move into the outcome quadrant and you would see outcomes and impacts happening. And I want to just ask you, first of all, what is your experience in government of where you actually go to once the agenda is brought in? And I just invite you to some people to respond to that. Once the agenda comes in, whether it's from the political manifesto or a minister, what actually happens in reality next? Where do you go to?
Anybody? Ian, can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah.
Basically,
okay.
So
there's a political manifesto to do something, maybe it's to solve child malnutrition or whatever the agenda is. And often that comes in And you may not then go through the systematic process of looking at what the problem is, looking at the root causes, looking at the options. You may jump that to move later in the cycle. In reality, I'm saying this is, so what I presented was in a sense a theoretical model of what would be ideally what you would do. But what happens in reality when the manifesto comes in?
Yeah, Ian, I'm passing it to the Principal Secretary of Health.
No, Ian, great meeting you. I also look after this department, Program Implementation and Evaluation Department in the state. Okay, but we don't have this kind of a diagram. Very honest with you, and you know, so we really have to learn from you. One thing that what you said is that we have seen there is a many states. My experience is that we don't follow that process. What we did, we generally jump. You know, that process, that what you said, like, you know, when a manifesto, an agenda is set. So to, you know, to develop that as a proper policy, I think very less time that we would take. I think we don't have a mechanisms also. For example, let's say someone from education department, suppose. So the education department will do, but like there is no mechanism where, you know, we come together, you know, engage a broader stakeholders, or a program like you, you know, a department like you, for example, program implementation and evaluation department supposed to do that. Maybe bringing everybody, convening everybody, bringing the research, getting some, like, for example, education. We have a great examples are there. Rukmini Banerjee is here. She's from India, the Pradham, and you know, she has so getting such kind of people, putting, you know, like ideating. So problem here is that one, you know, not much time is there. In fact, my colleague has said in the morning, actually, we rush. We don't have time, you know. So how? So that's there. And I don't want to go into the philosophical thing, but that's just I want to tell you how actually we do.
Yeah. So when you rush, what do you rush to do? What do you rush to do the design? Do you rush to do
So when we do rush, what happens is that generally we take the immediate. Sometimes no, many those things do work. What we believe in it. For example, what is the thing that has been done in some other state? We replicate it. You know, it's like in fact, in the language of our Professor Michael Woolcock, that maybe isometric mimicry. Am I right, or I don't know, Professor Michael?
Yeah. So then what you do is you take a model from somewhere else, and then you might you localize that design. So you jump to the design. Would that be sort of what you would say?
Yes, mostly it is done like that. We copy paste.
Yeah. So, okay. So does anybody else want to add there?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. Usually in any program or the project cycle, we are supposed to follow that cycle, planning, redesign. But what usually happens is that whenever any programs are sent, we just follow the programs. If we know the gap, we do not redesign the gap. That is why the drawbacks happen, because as said, all programs does not fit in with the same criteria everywhere. But this policy or the program cycle, that break where we have the flexibility of changing the cycle at any point of time, that is not done practically.
Okay.
Great. Back to you.
Anybody? Okay. So anybody else?
One sec. Yeah, there are a couple more comments.
Well, just to add on to what Yvonne just said, I guess that I've actually tried to understand why this is, and there's a tendency to interpret guidelines as rules. They're guidelines, but their tendency is always to stick to the rules, but they're not really rules.
Great. So Ian, just to give you, the first comment was from from the Principal Secretary of Health. Second was from Yvonne, a leader at the district level. The third is from the director of the Indian Institute for Public Health, the premier public health institution in Northeast India.
I saw a bit of Sandra's inputs yesterday. Yeah, so this is typical. I mean, this is typical of what I've heard, ranging from South Africa, Ghana, Uganda, Malaysia. Everybody says that in practice, what happens because of the rush, we have to implement something. We go basically straight from the agenda to design, and you know, so you know, if it's a copy and paste of an existing thing, it might not even be to design. It might just be to your operational planning. You're given the design, and you've then got to go and say how you're going to implement it. So you just do the operational plan and then you implement. What's the danger with that?
Okay, let others step in. Should I just go to people at randomly? All right, go ahead. Secretary Health.
If we're going, you know, if we are usually following guidelines, and these guidelines have been thought upon usually at the central level, not applicable to certain areas, especially in Northeast area. For for example, we had 1 million well scheme earlier, and that particular scheme was meant for constructing wells. Now that same program was given target to us in Northeast, and we cannot construct wells in the border areas. We have ravines and, you know, hills. So we had to improvise. So for those of us who dared to improvise, I mean, we have to take up with the audit later. It was okay, but for those who just follow the guidelines, then it becomes a problem.
So can I, that's a nice example. Can I invite you to just think about the fact that you haven't gone what is known about the problem. You haven't gone through understanding the root causes and considered options. So what problems might that cause?
You want to go?
Yeah. So if we don't, you know, if we follow the rush, you know, what problems that we might face? That's what you're asking, right?
Yes. If you haven't systematically thought about what is the problem, what are the root causes to the problem, and what might then be the right options for addressing those root causes, you rush straight into design. What problems are going to result as a result?
Yeah, it's mostly, you know, this is what I wanted to say, especially with the states, there is a less of an accountability, the honest thing. Is there anybody actually would say that like you have not constructed a particular thing properly? Seriously, these are the challenges actually. There is a less of accountability. And suppose, is there anybody says that like, suppose if somebody, you know, is, you know, our, I would say an example of, you know, a infant died in a hospital. So there may be, you know, so it's a very, very difficult, you know, to, because there is no such accountability is there. So what we have been doing, Ian, actually, this is something that's very interesting. In the absence of those mechanisms, we found the best mechanism is, you know, building that intrinsic motivation, building that purpose. So I think that would actually would be much better. So this is some, again, I'm going, yeah, but
back to you, Ian.
So anybody else want to add? So if you haven't, for example, what's the implication of not understanding root causes?
But we might end up having duplication or overlapping, you know, of results. You know, I mean, like if something that is already being implemented by another program ends up being implemented in just a different manner, and then we don't get the results, the required results. So problem in implementation ultimately. Okay.
Back to you, Ian. Back to you.
And any other inputs? What if we don't understand root causes? What are we likely to address? What's the opposite of root causes? When you go to the doctor, the doctor will hopefully do a diagnosis to understand the root causes of your disease. If he doesn't understand the root causes, what is he or she going to treat?
One second, let's.
Hello, sir. So you will be wrong diagnosis.
Wrong
Wrong diagnosis, wrong treatment, and
Symptomatic treatment, sir.
Symptomatic, that's the word I was looking for. If you don't understand the root causes, you address symptoms. And if you develop your program to deal with symptoms and not root causes, what happens?
Somebody?
You will either not solve the actual root cause of the problem or create a new problem of its own.
Exactly. Okay. Okay, so I want to give you an example now. So, but this is a very, very important point. And if we don't do the problem diagnosis properly, we think we're saving time, but actually we're causing major problems. And I want to give you an example. So this is the first 10 evaluations that were done in South Africa when we set up our national evaluation system. And you can see they cover a whole range of things: early childhood development, a business process services program, adding an additional year of schooling, nutrition programs, export marketing, a whole range of things. And now I want you to tell me what you see in this slide. What does this slide tell you?
Everywhere major changes are required.
Yeah. And why do you think?
and
what is that telling you? So many of the programs, when they were evaluated, major changes were needed. So what is that telling you?
The design of the program and the implementation of the program, I think there is no mechanism for them while designing. It should have been designed in a much more consultative way. And also while implementation, definitely, I think there are a lot of challenges. You can have a very good design, but while implementing, we learn a lot. So I think in fact, before you, a speaker, Professor Arun was mentioning, when we create a mission, are we actually reviewing the mission? What is working, what is not working? How actually we can strengthen that.
Sure. So it could be that there was a problem in implementation, but in many cases, what I would actually say, it's a problem with the design. The design was not adequate to address the root causes of the problem. Okay, so coming back to this then. Now, what's the consequences of having many of those programs needing major changes? Maybe somebody else could answer.
What are the consequences of many of the programs needing major changes? So one response is wastage of funds.
Yep. Anything else?
wastage of time, wastage of fun,
Yep.
even wastage of life. Yes.
And what do citizens think?
I just want to add that what we have seen so far in those slides, it just reminded me of one song from Alanis Morissette. It's like when you give 10,000 spoons, when all that person needed was a knife. So because of that, yeah, due to no proper planning and involvement of all the stakeholders.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Did you get that clearly?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And so if citizens are looking at this as their view of government performance, what's their experience of government performance?
They lost their trust, sir. And they will
Say that again,
also
sorry?
lose the trust.
Yeah.
They will lose the trust of that particular government.
Okay. So we rush to get the programs implemented. In the process, they don't perform adequately. In the process, we waste money. And in the process, citizens feel frustrated because they're not getting the quality that they expect. So I think the argument is we need to bring in that first quadrant into our planning process. And what I would argue is that planning is not just the right quadrant, top right quadrant. Planning is also the top left quadrant. So if you're a planner, you must diagnose first. And if you don't diagnose first, all you're doing is planning for failure. Okay, so strong messages. Unless we're diagnosing properly, we are going to be addressing the wrong thing in the wrong way, and we will waste money big time. Now, just coming back to the previous presentation where he was talking of culture. So we're trying to bring in this thinking, but this is the background to the culture in government. This is 3 governments, South Africa, Benin, and Uganda. So here what you can see is that around 30% of managers felt there was resistance by management to transparent decision making. Around 30% said there's little respect for the use of evidence. Around 40% says it's difficult to discuss performance objectively because of the hierarchy. About 50% say senior managers fear admitting mistakes or problems. And if I just come to the last one, around another 50% say problems are not seen as an opportunity for learning and improvement. This is a really, really big cultural problem, because if you do not acknowledge problems, you will not solve those problems and you will never improve. So there's a huge issue at the root of most bureaucracies, which we have to deal with if we're to get a system which is self-improving. And one of the things around that is, I think, it's about changing the accountability mechanisms. But so I think, does this echo with you? Does this look like familiar for the state and the Indian public service?
Yes, yes, exactly. We are all actually, brothers. So in the sense, like, we have been governed by the colonial, administration. So, but in fact, I wanted to share something to each one of you. We have, I was agriculture secretary for some time. So one of the things we wanted to bring that change management in the agriculture department. So we had a workshop like this. We have asked, like, why did you enter into the service? Same question, why, like, Mr. Brahma is a great civil servant. So so we have with a lot of passion. Everyone said we wanted to do something, a big, everyone. It's not like, I don't think anybody joins, because it's very competitive to get into the government. Actually, in Indian context, it's very competitive because everyone wanted to get into the government service. It provides a lot of stability and all that, and also it provides a lot of, social value. But we asked the same question, what is actually holding you back for not able to deliver what you wanted to deliver? And we have started we are noting down the reasons, like, and they have given about 25 reasons. Out of these 25, 18 are related to hierarchy. What you said. In fact, this is something that we really get connected with what you said. Thank you.
So just by the way, there's we've researched and written a book on evidence used by African governments. And there's a chapter in there that I'm the lead author on, which talks about the M&E culture in the public service, which you may be interested in. It's an open access book, so you're free to get it. And I'll make sure that Sanjeev has it. Okay, so then what I want to talk about is some of the tools that we can use to bring evidence into the policy or program cycle, and then we talk about it as the evidence cycle. So first of all, with your PDIA tools, there's problem definition, fish bones, but then also we can bring in research and research synthesis. And Sandra yesterday was talking about synthesis and the importance of synthesis. Very, very important. So how can we bring in existing evidence through synthesis? Before we were talking about stakeholder analysis. Evaluation is not only done at the end of the interventions. In South Africa, we very much see evaluation as something that's done throughout the whole policy cycle. We talk about diagnostic evaluation that's done to try and diagnose what's actually going on and consider the options. There's obviously community inputs, participatory inputs. We can be piloting, we can be modeling. These are all ways we can, and there are many other tools. SWOT's another tool you can be using as part of your diagnosis process. And through that, you come to an option and you select the intervention you want to take forward. And then hopefully you will do a theory of change. Actually, theories of change are not common. In South Africa, we introduced them through evaluations, and now it's been introduced into the planning system, but it wasn't there. So we brought it in through evaluations. You've got things like log frames in your design process and some form of operational planning, activity-based budgeting, etc. And then when we come to the implementation quadrant, there's your management systems, your monitoring systems, the administrative data you're collecting, and you can also do implementation evaluations during the process to see how things are working and how things can be strengthened. And they're evaluative thinking type models. For example, you can be running reflective workshops to try and review how things are going and how things need to be changed as you go. And in terms of looking at your outcomes, you can be doing outcome monitoring using administrative data. For example, are learning outcomes being achieved? You can be doing outcome impact economic evaluations. You can again be using reflective workshops with stakeholders to try and look at what are the outcomes and what are the impacts. And all through in the middle of the cycle is documenting, reflecting, and learning. So it's very important. So evidence is needed throughout the cycle, and evaluations actually should be happening throughout the cycle. And I want to just bring this then to, so what I've been talking about now is part of a training, a 2.5-day training that we ran in South Africa for the top 3 levels of the public service to try and get them to see why evidence was critical and why monitoring and evaluation evidence was an important part, not the only part. Research is very important too, and modeling and other things, but why monitoring and evaluation evidence is an important part. And it's all here to try and help make better decisions and achieve better outcomes by using the best available evidence from research and other sources. And we need to understand what are effective, what works, and achieving which outcomes for who, under what conditions, over what time span, at what costs. And we need to integrate research, monitoring, and evaluation evidence with decision makers' knowledge, skills, experience, expertise, and judgment, being realistic that evidence is only one of the factors that's taken into account when decisions are being made. Okay, so that's just a bit of background as to why the system, why it's so important, and why monitoring and evaluation has got a big role to play. But we have to do this as part, we need to do a lot of advocacy. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about the South African M&E systems. I'm not going to go through this. This is the way the different types of structures that we have: the Auditor General, Public Service Commission, National Treasury. We have cooperative governance dealing with local government. We have a public service department. We have the presidency, and within the presidency is the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation that I was part of. And of course, you have line departments, both at national and provincial levels. We call states, provinces, and they're monitoring in individual sectors. And we have our National Development Plan at the top. There's then the 7 priority outcomes which are identified in relation to that. And then the frontline services which are being delivered, which is what citizens experience. And then the way government is managed to deliver those services and achieve those outcomes. And we developed a number of systems of what we call the management performance assessment tool to look at how government is being managed, and the similar tool that was used for local government. We developed a number of tools to look at frontline services, citizen-based monitoring, frontline service delivery monitoring, and a presidential hotline for people to ring in to indicate where there were problems. And then there was a number of things done to plan and monitor the priority outcomes, to do the strategic planning and annual performance plans for departments, and then work that I was leading a lot on program planning. And linking this all up is evaluations, which are linking up how this is all working, what's happening, why it's happening, what needs to change. And I just want to introduce that I talked about evaluations being at different stages. So we talk about diagnostic evaluations, which look at the underlying situation and root causes. We talk of design evaluations, which check a program or a policy before it's implemented to see if the design is robust. Does it look like the theory of change is strong? And this would pick up, if they were done regularly, it would pick up this problem where the diagnosis is not being done correctly. Then there's implementation evaluation, which is looking at what is happening and why, and what outcomes are likely to be achieved. And then outcome or impact evaluation, which is, has the intervention had an impact at outcome and impact level, and why? And in all cases, of course, what needs to be done to improve. And then economic evaluation, which look at the cost and benefits or cost effectiveness. And economic can actually be combined with some of the other ones. Like you could do economic with a diagnostic to look at the costs and benefits of the different options you're thinking about. And we also do an expenditure reviews from the Ministry of Finance, what we call National Treasury, to look at what are the activities and are they cost effective. So that's, now I'm going to skip a lot of the other monitoring and evaluation systems, but in the presentation I'm giving Sanjeev, there are some hidden slides which show some of these other systems for if you're interested. And I just wanted to flag some recent developments, because one of the things that's been happening since I left government actually in 2018 is I've been working now from the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association. You have the community of evaluators in India. And we've been working with government to think about how we address the systemic crises that are facing the world now, particularly around climate and ecosystems health, but also around extreme and persistent inequality, and how we can mainstream these issues into looking in all evaluations so that all interventions have to think about what effect they have on climate or ecosystems and on equity. And this is part of thinking how we can get some transformational change to happen. And we have another hypothesis actually, which is if the South African M&E Association leads this, and we develop these criteria and guidelines, and we apply them in a co-creative way, working with government, we'll build on the collective knowledge of participants as well as resource people, help to create ownership, and maximize the likelihood that this work will be applied. And just in the words of Bobby Milstein and Jane yesterday, this is about creating shared stewardship. And these are the guidelines we've actually been developing, and they're being piloted at the moment. And the idea is this could become a transformative impact, because all interventions in South Africa will now have to think about these things. I just want to draw out some lessons, and I'm going to go straight, I think, to the lessons for the state. I've actually got what worked and challenges before, and you'll see them in the slides, but to give a little bit of time for interaction afterwards. So one of the lessons that's emerged from our work is that M&E has a very important role to play in seeing what is working or not and why, and how to strengthen what you're doing already. If you look at what government is doing already, what it's spending in its operational budget, the first priority before you do anything new is to try and make sure that that existing work is doing the right things, and it's doing them right. And it's using a paradigm which is actually going to create the change, the development impacts that we're looking for. And PDIA is really excellent for bringing in new initiatives, but you need to look at your existing portfolio and see what it's doing. You don't want to be in a situation where actually 80% of your programs are not performing properly and you're wasting money big time. And I think it's probably likely that that is the situation. Many of your interventions, your programs are not having the effects they should do. And so you're wasting money and you're frustrating citizens in the process. But building an M&E system is a medium to long-term project. In South Africa, we've been doing this in a very systematic way since 2011. Within 5 years, we'd achieved a lot. So it's not to say you can't do something in a short period of time. It does need a driver at the center of the government as a champion, and to play that a knowledge broker role where they're making sure the supply of evidence is being generated, but also that policymakers are wanting to use the evidence and are being given the evidence in a way that they can use it. It's also very important to build ownership. You don't want to do your monitoring and evaluation as an external body that people resist, which is what happens with audit. The audit process is seen as punitive and people really hate it. So we need to work with public sector leaders to build the culture. I talked about that course that we were doing with the top 3 levels of government. You need to build a cross-government coalition to support the monitoring and evaluation system. And you need to build the external ecosystem as well, working with bodies like the universities, like evaluators, like the community of evaluators, like others with M&E expertise to offer. And you need to work with Parliament, with think tanks and the media to support and use the system and to keep pressure that the system continues. And you need to make sure that evaluations are made public so they enter the public domain. And you need to do continuous advocacy with politicians and senior management, demonstrating the value. And that was what that 2.5-day course that I mentioned was about. And finally, I would like to, it's very important that you develop the system in an adaptive way. All too often, I'm looking at countries where they're trying to develop all the bits of paper first before they actually do anything. And actually, I think that's the wrong way to develop a system. You need to get to pilot and get going in the system, to prototype, to build the type of system that you know is relevant. Otherwise, you move into the isomorphic mimicry type model. So it's important to get some form of overall concept in the beginning. It doesn't have to be a policy. It depends on the culture in government, but then start with a pilot. So, for example, in South Africa, what we did was when we decided to start the system in 2011, we started by reflecting. I brought people together to reflect on what experience in South Africa was. We decided we needed to learn from others. We then went to Mexico and Colombia, not to the first world, to try and see what was relevant experience. We liked it. We then drew. I went with the deputy minister, the permanent secretary, and a team of about 10 of us. We decided during that visit what we wanted. We came back, we held a write shop where the team that went co-wrote the policy. We wrote the policy in 5 days, and it was approved by cabinet within 3 months. And then immediately we'd written it, we started with a pilot. And we started with a pilot to work out the way we wanted the system to actually work. And it's very important, I think, to build in this iterative way. The other thing is that there is a lot of existing evidence. So a very useful first step is to try and audit what evaluations already exist so that you can build that evidence base, which gives you a set of evidence you can do rapid synthesis on to build evidence where policymakers need it. We need to also look at adaptive approaches in doing the way we do monitoring and evaluation. For example, bringing evaluative thinking into monitoring, thinking of rapid evaluation approaches, not just doing long, rigorous ones. And it's important, I think, to start off by developing the system, not legislating immediately, so you know what you want before you fix it and freeze it in legislation. In South Africa, we waited too long to legislate it, but I would say within 4 or 5 years, you want to be legislating the system. Now, how many minutes more, Sanjeev?
Ian, I can sense the temperature in the room. 2 more minutes is the answer, and question and answers. Okay. So, sorry, 2 more minutes of formal presentation, but I want to get a dialogue started.
Yeah. Okay. So questions. So let's just go straight to questions and answers.
That's so
beautiful. What's your reaction?
That's why I like Ian so much, by the way. And so he gets me. Ian, let me start off. Let me sort of be a little skeptical, even though I'm not, of the national M&E systems. And I say, great, you've had this wonderful system since 2011. And let's think of the national M&E system itself as an intervention. What evidence do you have that it's actually improved the lives of South Africans? Assuming some expenditure has gone into the national M&E system. So let's take that as an intervention, and let's actually put your own intervention to the same test you've been asking Meghalians to do. Can you provide me some evidence that that your M&E system has actually paid any dividends? Over.
So we actually, to answer that question, at least on the, in fact, we've done evaluations of many of the elements of the M&E system. Now, obviously, for the M&E system to make a difference, you're seeking to improve the performance of departments, and you then have to see how those departments perform in the future. So there's quite a few steps before you are sure on the impact on citizens. But what we did do, we did an evaluation of the evaluation system, and our estimate was that there was a rate of return on evaluations, the spend on evaluations, of between 7 and 13 to 1. In other words, the improvement resulting from an evaluation was 7 to 13 times the value or the cost of doing an evaluation. There also, we could see many areas where policies and practices were strengthened because of evaluations, but that was our best guess of what the impact was down the road.
I think that's pretty good, because I think for me to make this case at either the state level or the national level in a formal sense, I think we need to be practicing what we preach. And I think even this, even as you clearly point out, the chain is a super long one. And so, but even then, I think asking that question and being true to that becomes important. I'm going to open it up, but maybe Sampaji, I know you were itching to ask a question.
I think I have asked a lot of questions, but Ian, I still, one thing, yes, we know that we need to spend a lot of time on planning. That's one of the key takeaway from your session, especially showing the evidence that you have shown about evaluation of different programs in South Africa. And you also have mentioned about another slide about what is actually preventing people to do well. So we have this understanding, but how to make this understanding to to an organization that would learn and start, doing things, that is where we are looking at some of the thought processes, like some of the, like the way we have yesterday, we spent a lot of time on problem-driven iterative adaptation approach. In fact, one of the important component is building that leadership or the stewardship, I think how to build that one. I think it's not a question, my observation is that how we are able to, build that culture, build that, I think it's a process. I think it may take some time, but as somebody said, I think Professor Michael only today morning, he was mentioning the people who, wrote, no war, they're no longer there. So I think maybe that kind of a sense of purpose, I think may require. It's a long-term work, but thank you.
Any reactions? Other thoughts, questions, comments? Sandra.
Ian, I had a question about how do you create memory? As in, you have learnings, you have learned, but we deal with teams. There are people who retire. There's attrition otherwise. How do you pass it on? How do you allow the learnings to stay on as a memory that endures?
Ian, you want to take that one? Right now, you're waiting for another question.
I can take it. So just to answer the first one, I think that this course that we did, 2.5-day course for permanent secretaries, deputy permanent secretaries, and the next person down in the chain was very, very important. And the sponsor of that course was the Chief Secretary to the Cabinet. So the invitation to attend the course came from him. And that course was very important at trying to, for these top government officials to realize that we weren't trying to punish people. We were trying to get them to do better, so they would do better in their own performance agreements, and their ministers would shine and the citizens would be happy. But in terms of creating memory, I think that it's very important to first of all build the system in a learning by doing way, so that there's real learning happening throughout the system. The other thing that we did was we were very systematic about developing guidelines. So as you know, there's 26, 27 guidelines and templates on different elements of the evaluation system. So that's providing a good base. We also developed courses for people to apply, short courses to apply at particular times in the evaluation cycle. We also created a coalition between the main departments in government to try and build the ownership of the system right across government. And this has been very important, because when I left, actually, to be honest, I left because my permanent secretary was toxic, and being a deputy permanent secretary, I had to deal with her all the time. And I stood it for a year, and then I couldn't any longer. I left. But what actually happened is that my department actually then went into a dip, because actually it's, you know, she actually damaged it badly. But because we'd worked with these other departments, other champions in government kept going, and they kept the system working. And also some of the people I'd worked with in these cross-government groups that I had created then took over within the department. And so they've been part of the system. They were even on the steering. I mean, the one woman who took over from me as head of evaluation, she was even part of the steering group of the evaluation system. So she had all that learning that happened. So I put a lot of effort in trying to make sure that exposure and learning was shared as widely through the system as possible. Also documenting, a lot of documents. We've written a lot of around the system to try and make sure that, you know, there's a lot of evidence about it.